Welcome to today's webinar, Beef Up Your Knowledge of the EPA's Changing Pyrethroid Regulations, brought to you by Pest Management Professional and Control Solutions Incorporated. I'm Bethany Chambers from North Coast Media, publisher of Pest Management Professional magazine, and I will be your event manager. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. You are currently in a listen-only mode. The recording will be available 2 weeks from today on our website, mypmp.net/webinars. A link to the on-demand recording will also be emailed to you when it is available. At this time, I'd like to acquaint you with the ways in which you can participate during today's presentation. Please notice in the lower left-hand corner of your console that there is a Submit button. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Just type in the text box at the bottom left, then click Submit to place your question in queue. Many of the questions that were submitted during registration will be covered in this webinar. Some questions may also be answered in an upcoming issue of Pest Management Professional magazine or in our e-newsletter, Buzz Online. We strive to answer as many of your questions as possible. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, select Help to submit your issue, and Assistant Producer Rick Aldrich or I will personally assist you. Now I'd like to turn today's event over to our moderator, PMP Managing Editor Will Nepper.
Hi, as Bethany said, I'm Will Nepper, Managing Editor of PMP Magazine and moderator of this webinar. Today, Knox will be discussing the EPA's revisions to pyrethroid labeling, both past and present, and how it affects the industry, and more specifically, how it affects the products you buy as well as your application methods. In a moment, I'll turn things over to Marie, who will help you make sense of the revised label language recently handed down by the EPA. The label language revision have altered time-tested application methods, and if you've read it as I have, you'll find the EPA report is pretty dense, jargony stuff. So that's what we'll be doing here today, making sense of the labeling revisions with Marie as she explains why they don't have to have a negative effect on the way you conduct business. So Marie, you can take it from there.
Thank you so much, Will. I appreciate that lovely introduction, and I also want to thank the audience for taking time out of their busy schedule to join us today for this webinar. What I'm going to do is present this in two parts. So we'll have a part one and a part two. During part one, it'll be a lot of words on the screen, and that sometimes can be a little bit slow or a little bit boring, and hopefully we're going to keep it as entertaining as possible. But during the first section, we'll go over the language itself, the past of the revisions, as well as the new revisions that were handed down as of January 2013. And then moving into the second part, I will basically put some visuals together for you to help explain and put all those puzzle pieces together so you can have more of a full view, an overview of what's taking place, and some practical application methods that you'll be able to use in the field. So without any further ado, we will get into our program. The first part is the Directions for Use label revisions. A little disclaimer at the beginning. Pretty general information, but I need to review it. You must follow the directions for use and environmental hazard statements listed on the products you currently have, as well as what you intend to purchase. So the products you have in your chemical storage rooms, you need to take a look at their labels and see what those labels say on the bottles. The second point, not all manufacturers have requested revisions to the 2009 revisions as of yet. It is in process. So some of the things we're going to go over today may not be showing up on labels for a little while. Some manufacturers may provide supplemental labels, some may not. And we'll get into that in a little further detail in a few slides. Also, not all requested revisions are on these labels, and the older labeled product is going to probably sell out if it hasn't already, and the newer product with the labels reflecting any subsequent revisions will become available. So it is up to you, the PMP, to keep track of the label that's on your bottle and make sure that you're reading it each time you get a shipment in. So what is being presented today is simply an explanation of what has occurred, why certain changes have been made, how additional revisions are being made to some pyrethroid products, and how it may impact you. Please always read and follow label directions, and always consult your individual state regulatory officials for clarification and their interpretation of the label language. Some states, as a side note, are even suggesting further or more stringent revisions than what the EPA released in January this year. So do keep that in mind. Your state regulatory officials can be very, very good sources of information for you, especially for clarification on these types of revisions. So a little bit on the background. What happened, where did this come from, and why? Back in 2009, the EPA revised these sections of the labels, environmental hazard statements, as well as the general directions for use in non-agricultural outdoor settings, basically what we do around a structure on a daily basis, the specialty uses for these products. And the point was to limit off-site runoff and drift. So it does have a positive point behind the changes. The label statements spell out good stewardship as well as best management practices, and they clarify how these products are to be used in residential, commercial, institutional, and industrial areas by two different groups, by professionals, you, the PMPs, as well as residential consumers. The pyrethroid products that we often refer to the big box stores, they are also affected by these revisions. The 2009 label statements were meant to clarify how outdoor pyrethroid products are intended to be used. And for pyrethroid pesticide active ingredients subject to re-registration, the label changes were required. And for all other pyrethroid active ingredient products, it was encouraged. So back in 2009, a notification letter was sent on June 4th to all of the registrants, the manufacturers, etc., by EPA explaining the label initiative, and it allowed 1 year for these registrants to submit amended labels. So by June 4th, 2010, all of the people who make the product and hold registrations for pyrethroid-containing products needed to submit the amended labels with the original revisions on them. Now what happened is that some of the statements in these revisions seemed a bit ambiguous to many people in many different groups. So we're going to call them the stakeholders, PMPs, the individual states, industry groups. Those are the stakeholders. So the stakeholder response to the EPA, that's what we're going to talk about right now. In 2011, the EPA began receiving requests for clarification and in some cases approval to make revisions to the revised label language from those stated groups. So individual states asked for clarification. Professional commercial applicators asked for clarification on what these revisions actually meant. And an example, in case any of you guys have read through the 2009 revisions, an example of one of the more ambiguous statements was to not make any applications when there's impending precipitation or impending inclement weather or within 24 hours of rain. And that can be kind of difficult depending on the state that you're living in, as well as it's kind of ambiguous. We're not meteorologists, and frankly, we can't always tell the weather correctly. I mean, the weather guy in the morning generally doesn't get the weather correctly. So we needed, as an industry, some clarification from the EPA, and that's what we did. So as part of the stakeholder response and this is the response from the EPA, on September 18th of last year of 2012, members of the EPA's, and this is a mouthful, Pesticide Reevaluation Division, Registration Division, and Environmental Fate and Effects Division attended a workshop facilitated by the NPMA and ASPRO, which is the Association of State Pest Control Regulatory Officials, in conjunction with the State FIFRA Issues Research and Evaluation Group. So let's just lay this out. So basically our industry group, our associations, got together and held this workshop, and EPA, all these different groups from the EPA attended, and they all wanted to discuss what the revisions meant and get some clarifications. So the workshop was developed to discuss questions that were raised by PMPs, like all of you, concerning those original 2009 Pyrethroid non-agricultural label language revisions. At the workshop, this is what they talked about. They touched on the biology and the behavior of certain overwintering aggregating pests. Some examples would be the marmorated stink bugs. I think I had a question about some box elder bugs. These overwintering aggregating pests that generally, the 2009 revisions would make it very difficult to control. So that was a big topic at this workshop. And also, in addition to discussing the biology and behavior of these pests, they also talked about various strategies for treating the pests. And the original strategies, the effective strategies, were discussed and demonstrated. The PCOs in attendance also demonstrated how the 2009 limitations on general surface applications to the outside of structures to areas less than 3 feet above grade or restricted to spot and crack and crevice treatments were going to impede a PCO's ability to effectively control certain overwintering pests or occasional invaders. Still, hang with me, we're still talking about the workshop. In addition to that, the PCOs also pointed out that sealing off or the sealing of cracks and crevices or entry points is very labor intensive and potentially an ineffective means to control large populations of these overwintering pests from seeking harborage inside structures. NPMA, ASPRO, and the FIFRA group suggested revisions to the directions for use on pyrethroid pesticide products intended to clarify potential ambiguity and enhance the capability of PMPs to treat these overwintering pests. So just to give you a little snapshot of history before we move on to the next slide, is those original 2009 label revisions stated that you could do a continuous band around the base of a structure only from the ground level up 3 feet. That was the only continuous band. Everything else was restricted to spot, crack, and crevice on that structure, except the underside of the eaves. You could also do a treatment to the underside of the eaves, like for spiders or other insects that might be up there, but not the side of the wall underneath the eave. So you're starting to hopefully see how there were some really tight restrictions and some ambiguity going on how to actually do a treatment without maybe ending up accidentally with a finable violation. The other part of the original revisions was something called impervious surfaces. If you had a horizontal impervious surface, like a driveway or a sidewalk that was attached to a house, you could not treat that area. You could do the 3 feet up, but you could not treat or broadcast or surface apply directly that horizontal impervious surface. And anything above that horizontal impervious surface was restricted to a spot, crack, or crevice. So moving on to the next slide. So that was the original proposed language and revision, and there have been some modifications. And that's what we're really going over today, but I needed to give you the history. So now, if you will, the EPA issued revisions to the original revisions. And let's hope it's the last round of revisions unless the next round is a little more lenient. So after considering the comments presented by the stakeholders on September 18th, the EPA has issued revisions to that 2009 language. And this is the start of it. Applications made by PCOs to treat overwintering pests will be allowed in size exceeding those of a spot or crack and crevice treatment if the treatment area is above turf or vegetation and when aggregating pests are present. So that aggregating pest has to be there, and the area to be treated has to be over turf, dirt, mulch, or vegetation. And we're going to get to a clarification slide. Treatments to large structural areas above impervious surfaces, such as driveways, will still be prohibited. And the reason is to limit the potential for runoff or drift to urban surface water. Continuing on with the revisions to the revisions. Prophylactic or preventative treatments to large areas of structural surfaces exposed to rainfall will not be allowed. However, treatments larger in scale than a spot or crack and crevice treatment applied to structural areas that are permanently protected from rainfall by a covering, an overhang, an awning, or other such structure can be made in the absence of pests. And in part 2, we will be getting into some visuals to kind of, give a storybook approach, a full picture, if you will, of what all of these words actually mean. So remember, these language revisions are just now being submitted for. So as a PMP, you must still follow the label on the product you have in hand, unless supplemental labels are going to be provided by the registrants. And we'll also in the end get into how you'll know if supplemental labels are available or when updates occur. So here's my clarification on this overwintering aggregating pest statement. So if the pest is present and the area to be treated is over turf or vegetation or dirt or mulch, you may make a larger than spot application to the surface of that structure over that area. If the pest is not present, but there is a permanent cover, like an awning, like an extended roof, maybe even a second-story balcony protects an area from rainfall, and the trick is, and it's over turf or vegetation, you may make a larger than spot application. The main rule you've got to always keep in mind is if the area is over an impervious surface, you may not make a larger than spot or crack and crevice application regardless of whether the pest is there or not. So this is the language that can be submitted for to be added to the directions for use or use directions section of the labels. So this is the language being submitted for now, and hopefully in the next several months will be showing up on the products. And I'll start with, do not apply directly to impervious horizontal surfaces such as sidewalks, driveways, and patios, except as a spot or crack and crevice treatment. During application, do not allow pesticide to enter or run off into storm drains, drainage ditches, gutters, or surface waters. All outdoor applications, if permitted elsewhere on this label, must be limited to spot or crack and crevice treatments only, except for the following permitted uses, if allowed elsewhere on this label. Number 1, applications to soil or vegetation as listed on this label around structures. And number 2, applications to lawns, turf, and other vegetation as listed on this label. Applications to the side of a building up to a maximum height of 3 feet above grade. And applications to underside of eaves, soffits, doors, or windows permanently protected from rainfall by a covering, overhang, awning, or other structure. It's kind of fun having label language read to you, isn't it? Moving on. Applications around potential pest entry points into buildings when limited to a surface band not to exceed 1 inch in width. I want you to envision with me a window on the side of a structure. And for fun, let's just say it's over turf. Limiting the treatment band to 1 inch in width may mean a pin stream application. I know that we're all used to using more than likely a fan tip if we're using a backpack or B&G. So we're going to have to be cognizant that the reason for this 1 inch in width, as explained by the EPA, because that does seem kind of difficult to do, it just means that if you think about the surface area around a window, if you treat 1 inch wide around an entire window, that might actually add up to the size of a spot. And the legal definition of a spot, or EPA's definition of a spot, I should say, is no more than 2 square feet. And we'll get into some different words and some definitions in a few slides. But I just wanted to kind of help demystify that band not to exceed 1 inch in width statement. Next, applications made through the use of a coarse, low-pressure spray to only those portions of surfaces that are directly above bare soil, lawn, turf, mulch, or other vegetation as listed on this label, and not over an impervious surface, drainage, or other condition that could result in runoff into storm drains, drainage ditches, gutters, or surface waters in order to control occasional invaders or aggregating pests. All right. So we touched on the original 2009 revisions. We talked about how there was some ambiguity and a great need for clarification, and how the groups came together and the EPA joined up with the state associations and the national associations and different PMPs to help demystify and clarify some of the statements. And now we're going to talk about what's next. What's going to happen? What are the next steps? So right now, registrants, like manufacturers, et cetera, are now submitting for the language on the previous few slides to be added to their pyrethroid-containing product labels. Remember, please follow the label that is on the product you're using, and always seek clarification from your state regulatory officials if you have questions. Anybody who is an inspector, in Florida, we have DAX inspectors. They're fantastic, and they're always happy to answer your questions. And it's definitely better to take the minute and ask for some clarification, and for your individual state's regulatory agencies for their interpretation of the label, because it could help you out in the long run. Next point, never spray. I have stars by all of these. So never spray impervious surfaces. Broadcast spray them. Driveways, sidewalks, etc. They are restricted to crack and crevice or spot treatment to these surfaces only. Never spray when runoff is likely to occur, when it looks like it's going to be impending rain, or when it's actually raining. We can't spray. We also cannot broadcast granular pyrethroid products during the rain either. And remember, all synthetic pyrethroid-containing products subject to re-registration, even the mixes and the new combination products that are out there that might have a pyrethroid active ingredient and then they might be mixed with something else like a non-repellent, those will have these restrictions as well because they have the pyrethroid active ingredient in them. So know what's in the products you choose before you use them so that you can use them according to their label. Okay, now on to the practical application section of the webinar, and hopefully this will paint a better picture of what all of those previous slides actually were saying. If any of you on the line have ever seen me live with doing my presentations, you know I like to keep things simple, very simple. I like to say it's not rocket science because it's really not. And our jobs are really great, and we work outside, and we work in a very cool industry, and I'm very appreciative for that. And I like to just keep things as simple as possible. So for me, this is how I think. I broke it down into 3 statements. These are the few good points to remember when preparing for an application. And it's also a great thing for your technicians to get into the habit of doing these 3 things. Look up, look down, and is it raining? I'll explain what I mean. So it does sound pretty simple, right? Too much of the time we're only looking at the obvious. We've been called out to a structure, we're looking at the pest, we're looking at potential entry points, basically the obvious reasons that we've been called to treat a structure. We need to remind ourselves now that in addition to looking at the issue, we need to look up. We need to see, is there a permanent overhang above the treatment area that might protect from weather? And we need to look down to see what's below our intended treatment surface. Is it dirt, grass, mulch, or is it an impervious surface like a driveway or an attached sidewalk? So now, before we get into the fun pictures, we will go over some of these important terms, starting with eaves. The eaves are defined as the edge of the roof that projects beyond the side of the building. And remember, you can apply to that horizontal underside of the eaves. Impervious surface. It's mainly an artificial structure of impenetrable materials like concrete, brick, asphalt, and stone. An example would be sandy soils or turf grass are pervious. Asphalt, on the other hand, is impervious. Spot. An area not to exceed 2 square feet. Not 2 feet square. This is always the trick question I like to ask in a lot of my classes on what does 2 square feet look like. Basically, envision in your head just standard 12-inch floor tiles and put 2 of them next to each other. I know it makes a rectangle. It's 12 inches by 24 inches. That is 2 square feet. If you were talking about 2 feet square, that would actually make an area of 4 square feet. So the EPA's definition of a spot in our industry is an area not to exceed 2 square feet. Crack and crevice, straight from one of the many EPA documents that they have listed on their website, is an application of small amounts of insecticides into, that's the key word, into cracks and crevices in which insects hide or through which they may enter the building. Such openings commonly occur at expansion joints, between different elements of construction, and between equipment and floors. And then we get to the permanent covering, overhang, or awning. And I think you all probably have in your mind a picture of what that might mean. It would be part of the structure that protects an area beneath it or below it from precipitation. Now, I know sometimes in Florida here we get sideways rain, and I think in a lot of other places in the country we get sideways rain. So it might not protect it, 100% of the time, but there is a difference between maybe a permanent awning and just an eave. So you got to use common sense. A small eave on a 2-story house does not protect the entire side of that structure from precipitation. But maybe a large balcony or a permanent awning would provide protection for the area beneath it from rain. As promised, we now get into the visuals, so everyone can take a nice deep breath. All the wordiness is pretty much behind us. We're looking at a great structure, nice American flag. And we're going to start taking just a peek at some of the things that we just defined. So you'll see hopefully on the left-hand side of your screen a little word popped up with some arrows pointing out the eaves. We also have a permanent overhang. So remember, we're looking up. Next, we're going to look down. And we're going to notice some impervious surfaces. And darn it, right underneath that permanent overhang is an impervious surface. So we need to watch out for those things because there's certain rules that apply for situations like that. Now, to me, this is a 1-story house. And where those eaves are, if you look below it, looks like a lot of turf and vegetation. For a 1-story house, that's a pretty good-sized eave. That might provide protection from that section of the house. So quite possibly, if you're in an area with those aggregating, overwintering pests, maybe that area underneath those eaves might be a candidate for a larger than spot or crack and crevice treatment because it's protected by the overhang and it's got that turf or vegetation below it. I absolutely love this picture. Reminds me of the cartoon Fat Albert. Do you remember Mushmouth, how he had his little hat and his little eyes pop through the hat? Well, anyway, enough about that. That's how that's what this house brings to mind for me. So, and my little statement underneath is, unless all of the structures you treat look like this one, you're going to encounter some impervious surfaces. So we are going to have to really pay attention to the way we're treating and how we're treating structures and the environment around each of the structures that we encounter on a daily basis. Taking a look at this nice 2-story house, looking up, you see some overhangs and some nice ones, not just an eave. Looks like you've got, permanent awnings. And looking down, you do see some turf grass adjacent to the structure on the left-hand side. However, you do see a lot of impervious surface. That's a pretty wide driveway. Looks like a pretty nice architectural drawing here. How would we be able to treat this structure? Taking a look at where the blue is, you could do 3 feet up around the structure from the foundation up 3 feet. And then I use the generic X feet out in that mulch, dirt, or turf surface. I don't give you a specific number of feet there because some labels might differ. They might tell you, that you could go 4 feet out or 3 feet out. So I just want to put, for this presentation, you can go 3 feet up in that area and X feet out. Always follow the label on the product that you're using. In addition, you might be able to do some spot treatments, or even where I have the spot treatments, they've shown up depending on your monitor, it could be hot pink or it could be red in between those 2 windows. You have a really nice permanent overhang there. So, you could do a spot treatment, or if you needed to, for those overwintering pests, possibly larger than a spot crack or crevice in that area. And just as a heads up, we're not going to go ahead and finger paint all of these houses and photographs with where you could do treatments. I'm just going to give you some examples to kind of help explain what we went over in Part 1. Turf and ornamentals may also be treated. But please keep in mind you want to avoid impervious surfaces. So if you're using a liquid, we don't want to overspray onto that driveway. You could go to the very edge to do an actual crack and crevice treatment, but just be mindful to not overspray or do broadcast treatments on top of that impervious surface. And if you're using pyrethroid granules, whether they're those neat ones that break apart, by themselves or when they get wet, or if it's on a sand-based granule, you'll want to sweep, and it is a rule, you must sweep any granules back into the turf off of driveways or sidewalks or pavers, etc., not into storm drains. They need to go back into a turf surface. Our next structure looks pretty good. We have some nice overhangs. On the left-hand side looks like just a general eave. And then looking down, we do have some impervious surfaces. And all of these pictures look like it's been really good weather, so it's not raining. So how would we go about treating this structure? The blue, I'll explain it because it's showing up pretty bright on my screen, probably pretty bright on yours. On the left-hand side, you're going to see 3 feet up from the foundation, as well as a section kind of coming out, if you can see it, into that mulched area, because it is mulch and turf below that area. So as long as you're following the label that you're using, you can go 3 feet up around that structure, and then in those turf and mulched areas or vegetation areas, you can come out. You can also do that. It's a nice planting bed there to the left of the garage, to the right of the front door in front of the porch. So you could do 3 feet up there. You could come out a little bit there as well. And hopefully you can see a thin blue line that outlines that sidewalk and the edge of the driveway. That's representative of a crack and crevice treatment down the crack or edge of that impervious surface. And lastly, underneath some of those overhangs and eaves, you can see a thin blue line representing a treatment to the underside of the eaves. Remember, it's the surface of the eave, not the structure. So just to clarify what we were talking about. Now we've added some spot treatments. Again, it's reading either hot pink or red on your screens. Now these look like larger than a spot treatment. And I've put them there because we do have some pretty nice size overhangs, number one. So the first rule is look up. Second rule is look down. You've got planting beds or turf below them, and it's not raining, obviously. So we would have those larger than spot treatments. And since we have a nice size overhang, that overwintering pest might not need to be present. You could do an application there without the pest present, because it has the overhang. If it didn't have the overhang, but you still had turf below it and you had the pest present, you would be able to do that similar application as well. This might be a weird rendering for some of you, but for me, it really helps to illustrate a lot of those points that we covered in one picture. This is an architect's rendering, and I am not quite sure if on the left-hand side of this structure that's a covered party area because it's got grass, or maybe it's just a grassed carport. But whatever it might be, it's definitely helpful in kind of taking a deeper look. So it's a beautiful sunny day. It's not raining. And we have a lot of overhangs. But we also have a good area of impervious surface there. So even though we got a lot of overhangs on the right-hand side, we've got that what looks to be maybe a brick or paver patio. Could be a concrete patio underneath the overhang. So just to point out the overhangs and the impervious surface. How would we go about treating it? Looks like you can do 3 feet up and possibly X feet out into the turf area. Always, again, following your label directions. You can do a larger area underneath that nice overhang for overwintering pests, and since it's protected and it's over turf, the pest does not have to be there. And then a little bit further to the right, you see the little spot. Possibly that could be a larger treatment area if that overhang at the second story above it actually covered it well enough. But I kept it as a spot just to kind of give you a general reference there of the size differences between a spot and a potential larger area, treatment area for those overwintering pests. Next structure, we're looking up. It's a beautiful day. And I do see some overhangs. On the left-hand side, I see some eaves. And below, we do see, when we're looking down, we've got some impervious surfaces. We have a porch. Even though it's covered, it's still an impervious surface. We have a sidewalk or a walkway to the house. We have a driveway as well as a sidewalk in front of the house. So a lot of impervious surfaces. I picked this artist's rendering as well just to kind of put up for debate there that eave on the left side of the house, since it is a 2-story house. You know, this would be a great opportunity to ask your state inspectors how they would rule on this type of structure, whether they would agree that that eave on a 2-story house would offer enough protection from precipitation or not. So how would we go about treating this structure? Where would we apply our pyrethroid-containing products? Well, we would go 3 feet up, and again, we didn't paint the whole house with all of the 3 feet up areas, but I think you're getting the general gist. So we could go 3 feet up. Also in those turf areas, if your label allows it, you can go X feet out or a number of feet out. You could go around that window. You would be restricted to a 1-inch band in that porch area. Remember, if it's over an impervious surface, you're restricted to a spot, crack, or crevice type of application. So it doesn't mean you can't do anything over an impervious surface. It just means you have to be very mindful of how you're making an application. And here comes the issue up for debate. That spot above those windows, say you have a 2-story structure like this, and you have those aggregating pests. If they're present, you could do that larger than spot application. If they're not present, I would highly suggest you seek the advice of your state regulatory official or your inspector to see what they would rule, how they would react to a larger than spot application when all you have on that side of the structure is an eave. Because I believe that that little eave, in my opinion, would not protect the whole side of that structure from precipitation. Here is a great picture for discussion. This looks like land of impervious surfaces. From the looks of it, this structure, by the way, I wouldn't mind living in it because it looks like it's in a wonderful place. But it looks like this structure is completely surrounded by impervious surfaces. So you could do 3 feet up, and that's it. Plus, you could do some spot crack, and crevice on the surface of the structure if you're using a pyrethroid or pyrethroid-containing product. You also would want to consider and keep an open mind about having a whole toolbox of products at your disposal. Most of the companies I work with, they have pyrethroids, they have repellent chemistries, they have non-repellent chemistries, they have all different types of products at their disposal, and most of you do too, I'm sure. It's pretty smart to give yourself some options. So in a case like this, I would say it would be a very intelligent decision to entertain the idea of maybe using some non-pyrethroid products, some alternative chemistries, always, of course, keeping in mind that they all have their own list of possible restrictions, maybe by the number of times during the year they can be applied, or maybe they could only be applied to the surface of the structure and not out, on the ground surface or the driveway surface out from the foundation. So always be aware of the label and the restrictions that might be on any other products, but definitely entertain the idea of using some alternative chemistries. You have them at your disposal. We have an amazing industry, and we have a lot of options out there. So that's one that I would really consider, that you probably couldn't get a really effective treatment doing just a lot of spot, crack, and crevice here with pyrethroids. So you may want to mix it up and entertain some alternative chemistries, alternative to pyrethroids. So for everybody, north, I added this photo because since I had what looks like a subtropical residence in the previous slide, I thought I'd add some really good looking row houses that seem to probably be more up in the northern part of the country. They look awesome, beautiful. Still, I wouldn't mind living in one of these either, but they are just surrounded by impervious surfaces, by sidewalks, by driveways, stairwells. So again, you're not going to have to use a pyrethroid for everything, and you're not restricted. You have a lot of options out there, and you have a lot of other types of chemistries that you can use and that are at your disposal. So definitely keep that in mind as an option, especially for situations like this and the previous slide. All right, touching on one other thing, a little bit getting away from doing that on-structure treatment, we'll touch on just treating turf areas using granular and or liquid formulations of pyrethroids. So turf and ornamental treatments are what I would consider business as usual, but you do have a few reminders, and always, again, refer to the labels that are in the products in your hands. Number one, never apply during rain. Always sweep granules off of impervious surfaces back into turf, dirt, or mulched areas. Now here's something to really consider. I know you guys can't really answer me, guys and gals, but how many of your technicians have a broom on their truck? If you have a bucket or a bag of pyrethroid granular product on your truck, I would highly, highly recommend you get just an inexpensive broom and get that on that truck as well, because that's something that maybe during a routine stop or inspection you could get caught for. Because the rule is if you're going to use those pyrethroid granules, you've got to sweep them off of impervious surfaces. So investing in some inexpensive brooms could be a very good decision. If you're using liquids, follow the label and remember not to overspray onto those horizontal impervious surfaces, the sidewalks, the driveways, the walkways. And always follow label directions considering application setbacks. Some labels might have a water setback or a well or a cistern setback. So definitely keep that in mind. Now let's put it all in perspective. Remember, I like to keep it simple, and I also like to take a step back and realize it's really not the end of the world when we have these types of changes. Changes occur all of the time. I mean, heck, every day I walk out the door and I might have planned my day minute by minute, but changes are always going to occur. So when changes are made to labels or to application techniques, it doesn't have to mean the sky is falling. These revisions were truly intended to reduce runoff and pesticide entry into unintended areas. And it's really, really smart of you all to get ahead of the changes. Attending a training like this is a great first step, and making sure that you take what you've learned and you take it back to your companies and you share it with everybody is very, very important. In fact, if you don't have SOPs, standard operating procedures, for pretty much every facet of your business, it's probably a really good time to write some new or revise your current SOPs for exterior perimeter pest control, for turf and ornamental treatments using pyrethroids. It's time to take a look at them, and it's a great time to sit down with your staff. I know it's always nice to have a new topic to talk about when you have your company meetings, whether they're weekly or biweekly or monthly. So now you've got another new topic to address, and a great time to kind of touch base with everybody in the company and discuss the changes that are going on and help everybody understand that it doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but it does mean that we're going to need to be a little more cognizant of how we're doing treatments. And also, it could help us communicate even more with our customers, because they might see us doing something different now around their structures than they're used to. And it really opens up a great opportunity to increase your communication level with them. And you don't have to, approach it, with the attitude of, these changes took place, so now we have to do it because the EPA says so. This would actually be a great opportunity to spin it in your favor and take that angle of, we are stewards of the environment, and this is a great step to not only maximize what we're able to offer you as a company, Mr. or Mrs. Homeowner, but also to protect the environment and to be judicious in the way we use our products so that we can continue to have these great chemistries available to us. So, take it as an opportunity to communicate with them, to communicate with your staff, and to just get a little refresher on what's going on. And then I always have to add, always read and follow label directions and be aware that labels could still be changing, so check in with your distributors and manufacturers frequently for updates. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy day to attend this webinar. I want you to know that we are all here, PMP Magazine, Control Solutions, me, myself. We appreciate you. We're here to help, and you can contact us at thecontrolsolutionsinc.com as well as mypmp.net. Feel free to email me or Will. Our emails are right there on the screen for you. I would love to hear feedback and get any extra questions you might have. And just feel free, even if it's not on the pyrethroid revisions topic, if it's on something else, feel free to direct your questions to me. So now I believe I'm going to be handing it back to Will for some Q&A.
Yeah, we've got some questions here for you that have come in. First one, they ask, how will I know if or when the labels have been revised for the pyrethroid products I use?
That is a very important question, and one I'm very glad that it was asked. It is up to you, the PMP, to keep up with the labels on the products you use. I know, kind of sounds like a drag, but it is your responsibility. So it would be my suggestion that you stay in contact with your distributor and your manufacturer representatives and ask them for updates as they have them. Some product manufacturers might even be listing their new labels on their websites, or they might even have like an update tab on their website. You never know unless you zip on over to their site to see what's new. So that's a great place to check for updates. But the most important thing is to look at the labels on those bottles that you have in your hand and in your chemical rooms, and make sure that you're following the language that is on them. So always take a look. When you get new shipments in, feel free to communicate with any and all of us, but always take a look at the products that you're giving to your technicians and the products you're putting into your chemical storage rooms to update yourself and make sure that you are following the language that's on the product you're using.
All right. Another question we have here is, what if I use a product that has another active ingredient plus a pyrethroid? Will that be affected as well, or is it just the pyrethroid-only products?
That was almost like a tongue twister.
Yeah, it really was.
That's really good. That's a good question. Yes, any pyrethroid-containing product, whether it's just your straight-up bifenthrin or your bifenthrin mixed with something else, and I'm just using that as an example. There's a whole bunch of different pyrethroids out there. But whether it's by itself or in a mixture with another active ingredient, it's going to be affected by the revisions. And so just keep in mind, again, visit your manufacturer's websites and talk to your distributors for any sort of updates. But yes, if it's got a pyrethroid in it, a synthetic pyrethroid, then it's going to fall into this category.
Okay. This person is writing from the southeast and says, I brush granular pyrethrin, and the sand kind, into cracks on paver patios and driveways for pavement and big-headed ants. Will I still be able to do this?
Man, I love that application technique. I do. I live in Florida and have a lot of pavers. Wow, it's a great question. So this is one I would suggest you ask your state regulatory official. Some people, some inspectors, they might consider that a crack and crevice treatment. You never know. You just got to open up that dialogue with them. But, the rule is that you have to sweep all of those granules off of the surface of that driveway or that patio that's made of pavers. So some inspectors may see that as nearly impossible, and they might say that you can no longer do this type of application. So this is one that I can't weigh in with the final answer on. I would definitely suggest that you call your inspector, your DAX inspector, your state regulatory official, and definitely post that question with them. And if you get an answer, definitely feel free to email me what they say.
Another one we have here came in via registration. Why so much noise about structural application while allowing broad application of the same products to entire turf areas?
Yeah, I know, man. Structural applications are getting all the attention, and turf and landscapes just getting no love. I'm actually making a joke. I definitely get the gist of this. So it kind of, to me, there's probably two parts here. I have a turf background too, so I'm going to pull this from the land of my golf turf background. Back in school, we used to have bumper stickers on our trucks, and I had one that said, "Turf, nature's finest water filter." I think it was nature's best water filter. So I think one of the reasons I could say that all the noise is occurring in the structural market, the impervious surfaces area, is because for turf, when you're making applications there, number one, the turf grass, just the turf in general, the plant, and then the soil profile really does catch the active ingredient and filter it out before it can get to the water table. So turf really is a phenomenal water filter, and that's why it's pretty much business as usual in turf and landscape. Now, the explanation behind why there's so much noise about the structural side is think about all the impervious surfaces with our exterior perimeter applications around structures for pest control. So the house itself is an impervious surface, the sidewalks, the driveways. We tend to be treating places where water or rain could move the molecule, could move that active ingredient off of the treatment site and possibly, into an unintended area. So that's why I think we're getting the noise, about it more in the structural end of things rather than in turf and ornamentals. It's almost like, we're getting picked on and in the landscape side's not. But the second part of that is I have had the pleasure in my history to actually represent and sell some pretty cool pyrethroids in my past. And one neat thing about that molecule or about that type of chemistry is that they kind of stick to organic material. So when I was doing a lot of training classes on treating for like sod webworms and turf, I would emphasize using a lot of volume to drive the active ingredient off of the grass blade and down into the thatch so it could stick there rather than sticking and drying on the leaf blade, because then it's just going to get mowed off. So basically I think it's a two-part thing. I think turf areas are great water filters, and structural areas the product might not stick as well. And then it comes down to the properties of that active ingredient or of pyrethroids in general, is that they tend to stick really good to organic matter once they're dry and not move. You can't really wash it off of an organic surface, but there is a tendency to be able to move it off of an inorganic surface. So hopefully, that's a very long answer, but hopefully I answered that question for whomever asked it.
Well, here we have another question. We've got a handful of questions from the webinar audience that are still coming through. This sounds kind of just like a general tech question. What is considered a low-pressure coarse sprayer? And the person asking says, we utilize 50-gallon pump rigs on our trucks.
Okay, that's a great question. So I might not be the complete expert on equipment, but I'm going to try to take a stab at it. And then I would also suggest that the person with this question or anybody else with a similar question talk to maybe their equipment people and possibly, a state inspector. But my stab at this answer would be generally low pressure coarse spray is we're talking about what's coming out of the end of that nozzle. So if you can deliver, I would, say around less than 35 PSI, maybe less than 25. Some labels even designate the PSI coming out of the end of your nozzle. So you might want to keep that in mind as well. But technically, a low-pressure coarse spray would be that lower PSI putting out a heavier, larger droplet, and that's really to reduce drift. When you have a low-pressure coarse spray, it's less likely to kind of become airborne and go land on an unintended surface. Now, can you use a 50-gallon tank and power spray and get a low-pressure coarse spray? This is where I'm definitely not the expert, but I would say hypothesizing if you could have that low PSI come out of the end of the nozzle, then I think it's definitely up for debate.
All right. A couple more here. I believe after reading this, I think this question refers to slide 38 in your presentation, if that helps at all. It says,
sure. I can scroll there and take a little peek.
The question is, the eaves above the garage appear to be above an impervious surface. Why are we still able to treat?
Oh, that's a great question. Great question. Applause for the person that asked that. Okay, so the revisions say that you can go 3 feet up the side of the foundation in that continuous band around a structure. You can go out from the structure if it's, oh good, thanks for flipping to that slide. You can go out if it's an or if it's a non-impervious surface. If it's an impervious surface, you are limited to spot, crack, and crevice above it. So you are allowed to do that underside of the eaves. I think that might be what they're talking about, that blue line on the underside of the eaves. Undersides of eaves are allowed to be treated according to the language. And then just for fun, you could do a spot, less than 2 square feet on, maybe the side of the garage door, on the wall next to it. So you are allowed to do some treatments over impervious surfaces, but you're restricted to spot, crack, and crevice over those surfaces. And never larger than a spot. So remember, there's the spot, which is no more than 2 square feet. And then there's the, larger than a spot area when you're in that section of the label talking about those overwintering pests, where you either need the pest and turf below you to do the treatment larger than a spot, or you need a permanent overhang and turf below the treatment surface to do larger than a spot. I hope that answers the question.
All right. The next question is also slide specific, looking at slide 47 from the presentation. And the question is, you mentioned 3 feet up on this structure, but I thought you cannot do this on impervious.
Oh, good question too. See, these revisions, now you know why a lot of clarification was needed on the original 2009 revisions. So as I've read them and as they were explained in the letter from the EPA in January, you can do, I wonder if we could zip back to that slide. You can do 3 feet up the side, from the foundation up, you can go 3 feet in a continuous band around a structure. But you cannot go out. On this particular house, you can't go out from the foundation on that impervious surface. So you can do 3 feet up and spot, crack, and crevice, but that's it on this type of a structure.
All right.
And Will, a quick question.
Sure.
So when everybody registered for the webinar, I believe on the registration page there were some links available to some EPA documents and to the language itself, the proposed language. Am I right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So one thing I might think we would want to do is make sure that everybody who's on this webinar, maybe we could resend those links out in kind of a contact email to everybody just to make sure everybody's got, just in case they didn't click on it when they registered.
Oh, it's on the resource list to the left of the viewer screen right now. They should be able to see that.
Oh, excellent.
So if that helps at all. All right. Let's see. We got time for maybe 1 or 2 more here. With so many alternative ingredients available, do you think this is possibly the beginning of the end for pyrethroid-based products?
Yeah. Wow. That's kind of a sticky one. I think everybody would probably agree with me. We never know. We really never know, and I think you can all agree. You've been active enough, long enough in our industry, if you've been around for the last 10, 15 years, at least the last 10 years, everyone's been speculating, and I hate to use these words, but is this active ingredient or that active ingredient on the chopping block? So is it the beginning of the end? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did, because I certainly would have won Powerball a couple weeks ago. but I do see it as a positive step as far as, just protecting the environment and being better stewards of what we have. And generally, as long as we don't abuse it and we kind of stick with, adapt to these changes, we'll probably still have pyrethroids for a good long time. But again, the last word on it would be the EPA. And so that's a great question, and one that we could probably, have an open forum and debate for like 3 hours. So good question, but I don't have a definite answer for you.
Well, Marie, I think we have reached our time limits. I want to thank everybody who participated in the webinar and thank Marie for offering such a wonderful presentation. And any questions, where they can be directed, I think you have all that information. And thanks to everyone. Thanks, Marie.
Thanks, Will. Thank you, everybody.